Hello everyone, Joey here. Just making this video just to help those that may want assistance in how to optimize your spin dashes and just know a bit more about how to get certain spin dash speeds more consistently and any other extras that you may or may not have known about how the spin dash works. So yeah, hope this video helps, and any questions you might have you might get your answer in this video. So this is for the original Sonic 2 for Sega Genesis / Mega Drive. Other Sonic games, 2D Sonic games specifically, you can use this as a basis to optimize spin dashes. They generally work close to the same, but a lot of nuances that I'll go into may not be one-to-one to the game that you're trying to do a spin dash in, so results may vary. So Sonic 2, Sonic 2 and Knuckles, Sonic 3, Sonic and Knuckles, and Sonic 3 and Knuckles are like the games that are pretty much accurately what's going to be useful for this guide. So this is a modified ROM of Sonic 2. You see the top left corner, there are multiple values there. It ranges from showing Sonic's X and Y coordinate and all that, and like his actual velocity, stuff like that. But we're not too focused on that. We want to focus on the bottom left 4 numbers of that string there. And I make sure to highlight them on the very far top, the top left of the actual feed. So you see you have spin dash speed, which is going to be the most important thing for this video. You see if I mash a lot, you see those numbers rising from 0 to 7 to 8, and a bit of 6 there. If you let go, then that is the spin dash speed that I've been given. So the numbers goes from 0 to 8. There's 9 spin dash speeds you can get in Sonic 2. And the numbers on the right, those are your decimals. So that represents the speed that you gain, and it represents on how much speed you're losing when you're holding a spin dash without revving. So I'm going to frame advance here. I'm still holding spin dash, and I'm going to just intentionally frame advance, and you see that number dropping. So again, it's hexadecimal, so it goes from 0, 0 to FF, and you see the spin dash speed is gradually decreasing as I'm advancing. So that's what that is. You don't have to focus too much on it, but that is what that does. So let's get the general concepts out the way. So obviously, the more you rev up, the better your spin dash is. But it's really important to have a specific setup or play style that helps you optimize this better. So an optimal spin dash speed is clearly just not pressing a button for the sake of just pressing it a lot. Like, you have to press it at quick succession and make sure to utilize the extra jump buttons that you have to get a better spin dash like that. So there's a lot of controllers out there, so it really depends on like what you're using. I'm using the original 6 button. I'm playing on original hardware, and I know there are users that probably have a more diamond-shaped style controller. As you can see here, you got a 360, diamond-shaped XYBA, and I know people that have used a keyboard style, which is more or less the same, but whichever works for you, you just gotta make sure you're the most comfortable with what you're using. But mostly any controller does the job. So the most optimal way to get a spin dash is to decrease the amount of time that you're holding down and not revving up. So I'm going to just say right off the bat, the most optimal way to get a spin dash is called a 6 tap, which is executing 6 button presses to rev up at quick succession. So it'll be something like this. There you go. So a 0.7 is more or less the most optimal spin dash you can get. There is one spin dash speed better than that, but we'll get to that when we get to that. But generally, if you can consistently find a comfortable grip position to get a quick inputs of 3 at quick succession, that's more or less just enough to play like 95% of the run. So this is the kind of spin dash you would want to see like almost every time. But yeah, like for these buttons lined up, there's 2 strategies you can go about this. You can have something called a piano grip, where you just have your index, middle, ring comfortably sitting on these buttons and just go 3-3, and there you go. And there's something called a thumb swipe, which is the same concept, except you use one finger for all this. So you do 3-3, do a little swipe like that. Works just well. I've used both. They're both good in a lot of ways, but it all depends on preference. But yeah, so the community dubs it as 6-tap because it's the minimum amount of button presses you need to achieve the highest spin dash speed. Like, you could just go for a rapid fire like this and just get your good speed, but clearly sitting on a rev like this is really inoptimal. It's really slow. So to shorten the amount of time you're crouching and holding a spin dash, it would just need a minimum of 6 inputs to get the speed that's, you know, just good enough, basically. But now I want to go over very specific spin dash speeds that aren't as useful for a lot of cases, but there's a lot of use cases for them, and I'll go over them, like, you know, strat specific, or maybe they relate to something positioning or soft pixel manipulation. So there is a spot in Emerald Hill Act 1. This is the later half of the level, very close to the end here, where you're right behind a layer of spikes, and if you spin dash off this ramp, you get a lot of speed up a ramp, and you come right back down to this spot. So you can visualize spin dash speeds based on the peak of Sonic's basically like ramp jump. So yeah, that's going to be useful for going through every spin dash speed. And once again, I'll talk about how to achieve them and, you know, how useful are they. I guess before I even start, because I don't know where else the place is in the video, if you spin dash and then you jump on the frame after you release the spin dash, you get something called a straight jump, which means you just jump out of the spin dash before you gain velocity. And what that literally all does is that you just jump in place with no speed attached to it. So 99.9% of the time, it doesn't do anything. So you would just want to make sure you don't jump after you let go of down for most cases. But yeah, let's get started. So 9 spin dash speeds I mentioned. So the first one we would dub as the 1-tap. Pretty straightforward. It's a 1-tap, and you get a speed like this. The best way to visualize, nice hit there. Best to visualize is you get the height just like so. You see Sonic's peak is pretty much nudging next to the ceiling mesh on the right. The little like feel the ceiling that's kind of on the right side. That's as high as he goes. This is generally like not crazy useful, like it's the slowest spin dash speed, but it is the fastest one you can get off of a spin dash because it's just 1-tap and there's no execution involved with it because you just press once and go down. So one thing I want to mention before we move on is that 1-tap spin dash is very useful because it's the first spin dash. So if I rev up and pay attention to the spin dash speed and decimals, nothing's updated. It literally just sets you up in the spin dash state. So this information will come useful later. Just know that there is no speed decreasing because it is the first spin dash. It will come to play later. But let's move on from now. So the next spin dash speed is, no surprise, it's called the 2-tap. So it is just what it sounds like. 2-tap spin dash, you should see a 0-1 come up, and that's your 2-tap. There's really nothing very useful about this one. It's just a slightly better 2-tap, but for consistency's sake, most people just will stick to the 1-tap because there's not much difference, so we could just move on from there. So I'm going to group the next two together because they are pretty relatable. So I would like to dub these as the unoptimal 3-tap and the 3-tap. The reason I call them this way is because a 2-tap spin dash is not enough speed to get an O2 on the spin dash mark on the top left, but a 3-tap spin dash is too good, so it completely overshots that spin dash. So the only way you would naturally get the O2 on spin dash speed value is if you do a 3-tap and intensely just hold the spin dash for a longer period of time after you initiated the 3-tap. Same thing with the 2-tap, there's not really much use for it. It's just generally just a worse speed. But 3-tap Spindash is where we're gonna dive into like actual use cases for these. So there's one spot of 3-tap Spindash is useful, and that is a Quadrigaron 2. I'm not gonna get into detail about how the strat works and like how to execute it. I'm just gonna show why a 3-tap is useful. So a lot of spots in Sonic 2 has a lot of setups that requires you to maintain a very specific sub-pixel value, speed, and all that. So doing 2 successful 3-taps in a row like this allows you to get a good amount of speed and have a good sub-pixel value to set yourself up into getting a really good ramp jump up this top here. But outside of that, there's not much else useful for it, but this is really valuable information for people who are optimizing their speedruns, because this is a very good route to get used to. Saves a lot more time comparing to how you would normally do it, which is not take the bounce at all. So yeah, it's the use case for 3-tap. It's probably the only one, and at the making of this video, it's the only one that I know of, but that can change in the future. But yeah, 3-tap is very useful. So in order to really get consistent 3-tap, you just want to make sure that you're not lingering down for too long. Because if you obviously linger down, then those are just extra frames that you are not revving up, and that speed starts to deteriorate. So you don't want that. So that's the 3-tap. So the next ones I will group together. This is the same concept again. So a 4-tap Spindash. It more or less is the exact same thing that I mentioned for 3-tap. If you do a 4-tap, you are able to get a Spindash speed that's higher than the one that is not optimal. So 04 and 05. So you want to get a 05 for the most part. Sometimes you get 04, but it's pretty tight. So now we're going into Spindash speeds that involves revving up using 2 hand motions. And what I mean by that is that you press the button once, and then you have to do it again because there's only 3 buttons, so you have to do 2 motions for it. Which doesn't sound like it doesn't mean anything, but it does add a lot of complexity to how to get a good 4-tap. So there's 3 ways to get a 4-tap Spindash, like physically. You can do something called a 1-3. So it's press the button once and then do a 3-tap right after. So I'm gonna do a 1-3 here. So you know, there's my 05 there. And then there is a 2-2, which is 2 buttons release, and another 2 inputs. Like that. Nice death. And then there is a 3-1, which is 3-tap and then into a 1. There you go. So the naive take of this would just be something like, okay, there's 3 ways to do this. I'll just pick the one that's most comfortable for me because there's no difference. When that's not the case. Out of the 3 I've shown, there is actually one consistent method that you should be doing every time, and that is the 1-3. The reason for that is what I alluded to before with the 1-tap. When you do a 1-tap, you don't have any speed decrease because it's the first Spindash. But if you follow that up with a 3-tap right after, there's a lot of frames that you're able to save by not having the speed decrease. So let me show you what happens when I do a 3-1. What's going to happen is I'm going to do a 3-tap, and I'm going to intentionally pause the game. Okay, so I paused the game, right? It's clearly not a 4-tap yet because I didn't do my 4th rev. But because I started with more inputs for the first part, I'm going to use that time to release my hand to rev up for the 4th input. But when I frame advance, my speed is decreasing. So by the time I eventually input this extra Spindash, I've lost enough speed where my speed drops enough where I lose the 05, which is the optimal 4-tap. But if I start it with a 1-3, not the best showing of that. Also not the best showing of that. There we go. If you can optimize that, then you can get 05s much more decently because you're not losing speed by doing it. And the same thing goes for a 2-2. Because I'm starting the Spindash with more than one input, the time I'm releasing my hand, my speed is decreasing. So if you want to optimize not losing much speed, you always want to start with the least amount of inputs, and then end the rev with a 3 tap to ensure that you have a higher chance of getting the optimal 4 tap. There's 2 use cases for a 4 tap spin dash, and that is in Hilltop 1 and Mystic Cave 2. So there's this part right here in Hilltop 1 where you want to optimally land on this platform, run up to the slope, and then make a jump to skip a seesaw. I'm gonna see if we can try to do it here. There we go. So you skip the seesaw, which saves a couple seconds. But if you get a slower spin dash speed, you run the risk of not making this slope here, and then you just take the lava hit. Or if you go too fast, then you'll just completely miss it. But depending on how fast you get here, it may change whether or not it works. And there you go. There's a little too fast there. So you want to get an 06 for the most part. But yeah, you can see it still works, but it really like shortens the window of it working. Because if that platform is slightly too slow or too low, then you're going to miss it. Here, I miss it this time. So getting an 05 4 tap spin dash is preferable here. Another use case is in Mystic Cave 2. So there is a ramp here where normally you would just roll on it, land here, do a jump up here, and you land on this platform. But if you're able to do a 4 tap here and jump on a frame perfect spot, I'm going to frame advance here again, you literally just cleanly go through that whole section there. And it saves you a couple of frames, or maybe like a second actually. If you're too slow, or I'm going to show what happens if you're too fast. If you're too fast, you can get a really tragic bounce off that wall, and you take a plunge in this bottom area, which you definitely don't want to be in. So actually, a optimal 4 tap also works here, so this still works. It's slower because it's the slower spin dash, but it still works. So an unoptimal is not the worst in this scenario, but in Hilltop 1, this is pretty bad, just because it makes the risk much greater to get the optimal spin dash here. So that is the 4 tap. So the next spin dash speed is the 5 tap. So when you do the 5 tap here, you should get a height that's roughly like this. So same thing I mentioned about the 4 tap. You want to do the 5 tap by doing the least amount of inputs on the first rev and end it with a 5 tap. So there's 2 ways to do it 5 tap. There is the 2-3, and then there is the 3-2. The optimal way is doing a 2-3 because, again, the higher your spin dash is, or spin dash speed is, the faster the speed decreases. So doing a 2-3 is more optimal here. So there is the 06, that is the 5 tap. And the one single use case for this is in Casino Night 1, where if you do a 5 tap and jump on this frame exactly, you cleanly barely avoid this bumper here on your right, and then you avoid getting caught inside of this little whatever that is on the left. And you just get to the end section here, which allows you to set up for a zip to the end of the level. So that's pretty straightforward. So I know a lot of people have issues with doing a 5 tap. So there is the less optimal, but could potentially be a way more consistent way, and that is the 1-1-3, which is basically doing a 1 tap, then doing a 1 tap again, but then immediately follow it up with a 3 tap. So I already did the 1 tap, so all I gotta do is intentionally do a 1-3 here, so basically a 4 tap after, to get my 06, my 5 tap. So it's just 1-1-3, 1-1-3, 1-1-3. So there you go. That's only useful for Casino 1, but you know, that's a genuine decent time save if you can get it every time. And then we have the optimal spin dash speed, the 6 tap, which is a 7. So this is the one you want for the majority of the run. So the best I can do without really repeating myself is maybe have more clarity of ways you can optimize this or how to get it more consistently. Because this is a very high spin dash speed, your speed is decreasing dramatically. So I'm going to intentionally do a 6 tap and then pause. Okay. And then now I'm going to frame advance to show you how many frames you have before you can let go of down to actually get a 6 tap. So this is 1 frame. This is 2. It's still 7. This is 3. And then I drop the 6. So this is 5 taps spin dash speed territory. So I only had 3 frames to let go of down after I've executed my 6 input for the spin dash. So it's a pretty tight window. So the best thing I can say is that try to get really comfortable with releasing your spin dash speed much quicker, roughly around the time where you're actually initiating the 4, 5, and 6 inputs. So 1, 2, and then almost the same time I'm pressing those extra inputs, 4, 5, and 6, that's the same time I'm releasing down. So I'm gonna try to like adjust it a little closer here. So I'll try to like release down a bit around the same time I'm doing the input. So that was incorrect. There you go. So it takes a lot of practice, but this is what you want. So a 6 tap is like when you have Sonic barely touching the grass here, like he's just kind of rubbing on the top of it. So that's your 6 tap there. So this is more or less what you want to see in every single run, right here. The more you get accustomed to that, the more you're on your way to like be really good at spin dashing in over 90% of the game. Alright, but there is one more spin dash speed after this. This is what we dub as the perfect 6 tap or perfect spin dash. This is as high as it can go. So I'm gonna rev up a lot. It's maybe really hard to tell, but for one single frame at a time, that number is hitting 8. That's because when I frame advance, once it finally hits 8, it immediately drops to 7. So when you achieve a perfect spin dash, that means that you release down on the exact same frame or the frame after that you did your input that initiated you getting the perfect spin dash. So it's a frame perfect spin dash release. There's people that can do it pretty consistently, but it's a hard thing to get. Like, even I don't get it all the time. See, okay, I got it there. And you can tell that it's a perfect spin dash speed because if you see how far Sonic goes, he's basically on the very top of the grass here. So that's your perfect spin dash visual here. And thankfully, there isn't a lot of usefulness to it. It's an objectively better spin dash, obviously. But there isn't a lot of cases where a perfect spin dash outright is able to do something that a 6 tap can't. A lot of the things are mostly just consistency improvements. So an example I can show is in Mystic Cave 1. So right here, the very start of Mystic Cave 1, when you first encountered the first hangar here, you normally would spin dash out over here, jump here, and come up here. But you're able to actually make it up with a spin dash here, like so. So if you make this drop here, and you land, and you do a 6 tap spin dash, so an 07, the more RTA viable spin dash speed, you have one single frame to make a jump on the edge of here to get up. But if you have a perfect spin dash, frame advance, you can see that I can jump on this frame, and I can jump on this frame. So it is a 2 frame window to make that jump instead. And then here's a completely different route. I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but there is a way to level wrap and Hilltop 2 involving a lot of sub-pixel glitch manipulation. You're in an awkward state, whatever. So you would normally have to be in position here and then charge up a spin dash. If you do a spin dash, that's a 6 tap, a standard 6 tap. And then I'm going to frame advance here once again and make a jump here. You would just run up to the left and you would bonk the wall, and sometimes you don't wrap, which gets you to the end of the stage. But if you have a perfect spin dash instead, and you time the jump pretty much at the same spot as before, you always have enough speed to make this wrap. Again, it's not a difference between whether it doesn't work or not. It just reliably works way more than the 6-tap. But outside of those two scenarios, it's basically just a slightly faster 6-tap with harder execution. The last things I can mention is what speeds, what ways you can optimally get a perfect spin dash. There's two ways. You can do something called a 9-tap spin dash. Now, that's just a term. There isn't spin dash speeds better than perfect, but that's just signifying that you would input the buttons 9 times. The reason you're doing that is because you want to ensure that, like, you have an optimal 6-tap speed going into the later half of the spin dash here. So pretty much every button I'm doing right now is always hitting the perfect spin dash for 1 frame. So what you want to do when you do the 9-tap is you would just do your 6-tap like so, and then on the 9-tap portion, basically input 7, 8, and 9. 7, 8, and 9. You would release jump around the same time you're pressing those inputs. So I'll try to do it. I'll do a 6-tap and then release down in between 7, 8, and 9. Get in, do it. I'm gonna try to do it again. There we go. So it basically gives you 3 chances to let go of down. So you ensure that you get the perfect spin dash. So you're revving longer just to ensure that you get a perfect. Now I say ensure as if it's guaranteed. It's still very tricky to get. Like, I'm not getting it all the time. But it's just something you have to practice your spin dash release. Not getting it. There we go. And then there's another setup that's slightly more easier. It's called pause buffering. So you basically do the exact same thing. You do a 9-tap spin dash again, but instead of releasing down in between the 7th, 8th, and 9th input, you press pause on the 7th, 8th, or 9th input. So I'm gonna do a 6-tap and then pause on the second time I'm pressing 3 buttons. Okay, so it didn't work there. So basically the visual cue you want is to look at Sonic's sprite. So on the first sprite that Sonic initiates the spin dash, you see there's a little like light, like a white little dot, a shine on his spin dash. But on the next frame, it expands, so, just slightly, and it goes back and forth every other frame. So back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So at any point you see Sonic with a fatter circle, that is a dead giveaway that is not a perfect spin dash, because perfect spin dash releases don't have him in this state, because the first frame is always when it's small. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pause, do this again, and right there you can see the ball is small, and it so happens to be an 08. So that means that this is the perfect spin dash speed. Sometimes you might accidentally pause on the, okay, so here's an example. Sometimes you might accidentally pause on the 3rd frame. So if I'll frame advance twice, 1, 2, you might look at this and be like, oh, okay, this is perfect spin dash speed because the dot is smaller. But no, that just means that you paused a bit late there. It's not the dead giveaway that it's perfect, but it does help in figuring out that it is perfect, considering you don't have the values to look at. So I'm gonna go through them all one more time just to show like their positions, because this is a good spot to practice it. So here's the 1-tap. Sonic is in this position. Here's the 2-tap. Not as useful. Here's the unoptimal 3-tap. Here's the actual optimal 3-tap here. Useful for a Quadroon too. Here's the unoptimal 4-tap. Only useful for Mystic Cave 2. And then here is the actual optimal 4-tap, which is useful for Mystic Cave 2 as well as Hilltop 1. And then here is 5-tap, useful for Casino Night 1. And then here is not the perfect. Here is the 6-tap, useful for pretty much the whole game. There you go. And then finally, you have the perfect spin dash, which basically touches the very top of the screen, well, of the grass. Only marginally useful for Mystic Cave 1 and Hilltop 2. And technically everywhere else in the game. So yeah, I hope that helps a lot in a lot of cases. I'll provide timestamps for spots that, I mean, you don't need timestamps anymore. You watch the whole video, but yeah, I hope everything was made a lot of sense. Hope it helps anyone. Then yeah, take care, everyone.